a lot of what we hear from school districts, and I'm going to ask our school district folks to help me out here, is mandate relief. I too served as a school board director prior to landing in the legislature. And I have said this, that educational excellence and fiscal responsibility are not mutually exclusive goals, that we need to do everything that we can to help school districts address their costs. And my fear is if we don't help school districts address their costs, regardless of how we tax to fund public education, we're not going to solve the problem. And right now, the local property tax is burdensome. If we don't address your cost drivers, I fear that other taxes could become burdensome. So that being said, I have worked with Senator Fulmer as a House member and now as a senator to address mandate relief for public education. And I'm certain I don't know everything. So I've found roughly about 36 mandates that I'm trying to address legislatively. Can you give me some of the most pernicious, costly mandates and just some thoughts on how we can go about relieving them?
I think we want to wrestle for that, for the microphone there. I'll give one and then I'll pass the mic, but I believe prevailing wage is one of the most burdensome on us. I know it's not a popular thing to say. It does add anywhere from 20 to 33% to any project we would do. So you want to have a driveway paved at home and we want to do one at a school district, we have the pleasure of paying 20 to 33% more.
Thank you.
I appreciate the question, Senator, because I think part of our testimony and our position with the school finance officers is the mandates. We're seeing in terms of, again, we talk about the historical increase. Pensions, hopefully they're slowing down. For those of you who are familiar with the Temple have and have not studies recently, I'm actually one of the co-authors, just to put that bias right out on the table. But that's what it focused on. It focused on the projection of the 5 years of the mandates. And what we're literally seeing is that the next 5 years we'll see basic ed, if it continues as it is, it will actually be eaten up by all of the charter increases. And that doesn't include the pension. So while pension was growing in the past 5 years at a rate of about $250 to $300 million a year, the pension rate, it's now down to about $65 million. Okay, and we go, wow, what a big change. In other words, it leveled off, but it's still $65 million per year for the next 4 or 5 years. So that's why we talk about, and the chair's question on what can we coalesce about. I've been doing this all the way back to Senate Bill 1, worked actually very hard on Senate Bill 1, for those of you who can remember that. It was a terrible vote that failed statewide. But the issue is, what we coalesce about is the need, and the need is homeowner, homestead as priority. There are other needs, but I think, again, in terms of the stories that we heard from Senator Scavello, those situations are there. I'm going to pick on Mr. Landis. I think in terms of the IFO and the demography that we see changing across this state, that's the priority. That's where we coalesce around, that we need to get that relief there. How we get into this, how do we implement? I understand elimination, and we have to be careful of the gorilla in the room, that elimination that we're talking about on this stage today is just school taxes. So we still have city and county and munis, and we're not talking about changing the tax code for municipal tax code or school code, which is how sheriff's sale, the bodies sitting here today could change that code, those codes tomorrow, and then you can't lose a house. That has nothing to do with property taxes. That's school code. That could all change tomorrow. But the point being is, if we're going to launch into significant, meaningful relief, in my opinion, that's what I hear from all the bodies. And again, Representative Ryan, he brought his hat. I don't know whether that's to protect him or not, but to launch the discussion about taxing retiree income, because full-blown relief, while it really helps those in need, it also rewards some really, really high McMansion houses that are owned by people with very, very, very high income. and we're looking at scarce resource dollars that we have at our public level, I'm not so sure that's the shotgun approach we want to take to trying to hit the target. I think we can do a scalable process. We can get it done. We can actually cross the finish line. And if it is truly scalable and with thoughtful reflection as to how we approach it, then what we can do is after 3 or 4 years go, you know what? The state's holding up their end of the bargain. The school districts are holding up their end of the bargain, and we can scale it up. If not, we can regroup. But if you launch a full elimination, there's no going back, and it's $30 billion, and I guarantee you it will take a decade for that dust to settle. So that's my thoughts.
Dr. Shrum,
Yeah.
I appreciate that thought, but would really like to have your input on those mandates that are the cost drivers for public education.
Well, I said
So
that. Okay.
perhaps
I miss
you
it?
could get back to the committee with some of the thoughts on that,
Well,
on
the
that topic.
Our proposal, PASBO's own proposal for the mandates is simply, the state used to pay about 20% of charter costs. We believe we should be going back to trying to lift that share. Special ed share across the state has fallen from about 31% in the last 7 or 8 years down to below 20 in terms of actual special ed. The governor's move to put more money in that was a big help, but it still won't create that share from losing. So those kind of pension, there's no reason why the state couldn't do a buy down of the pension rate. Instead of going from 34 to 36 over the next couple of years, why don't we move to 30 and the state raises its share? Those are things that are going directly to the bottom line of the local tax share. So if charter grew $178 million last year. Last year, 2018, basic ed was $85 million. So if we're not, and all that goes to the local tax base because there's $0 going to the charter tuition. So if all that's going to the local tax base, again, that's why we say a dollar for dollar won't even address those issues. Those issues will still continue. So then we have to kind of find a way to pound down with buckets, with additional funding, because when you're going to do a state swap for local, which is what this is, that's kind of the academic term, if you're going to do that shift, then what you have, now the state's going to have a higher responsibility to fund. They're taking over a larger share. They're putting more of their dollars in. We're raising their share from 32% up to 40 or up to 50. So then that means in terms of those additional mandate costs for special ed, for charter, for pension, is the state going to lift its share, which then entirely takes the need to come back and revisit property tax off the table. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
And speaking to that, the reason I apologize for going through my phone, but that question is timely because we received an alert today that the United States House of Representatives has a bill out, 1878, to fully fund IDEA from 1975 when it was to be fully funded at 40%. It's never exceeded 18%, and it hovers around 14%. So IDEA deals with special education, and that literally equates to millions of dollars in local tax dollars that are going in. That is not to say the law is not valued. It is. It's an excellent law, but the funding of it often falls on, the federal mandates are being passed down to the local communities. And I think that we would see almost immediate relief for our taxpayers. And additionally, not one mandate that's necessarily put on us by any government, but by our own school districts and communities, and rightfully so, is the increased cost of school security. It is turning into hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep our children safe. And I don't say that we shouldn't do that. Of course we should. But that is an unfunded, unmandated task that we take with great seriousness because our children are our most important asset, and we work very hard to keep them safe, and that's led to increased presence with police and security. And, to get into our schools, you now have to check in and make sure that your background is clear. So those are the types of things that, while valuable, are causing our costs to go up in addition to what my two colleagues have stated.
Thank you very much.